Okay, grade 7. I heard through the grapevine from the substitute that a lot of you were having trouble with the mixed fractions. So hopefully these 3 tests on the formative tests on 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3 might help you a little bit. Whatever the case is, Monday we'll definitely go over it together and we'll clarify any issues you guys are having. So for right now, just pay attention as we go over your answers to 7.1. There are 10 questions, I think, so pay attention. Make notes if you have your test in front of you, and that way you won't make the same mistakes twice. The lowest common denominator for the fractions 1/4 and 5/6 is 24. Remember, to find the lowest common denominator, we need to find all of the common multiples, right? We need to find common multiples. So for 4 and 6, those are our denominators. The multiples of 4, I'll stop there because I can keep going, and the multiples of 6, I'll stop there. Of those common multiples, any one that they share in common can be used as a common denominator. But for this particular one, the lowest common denominator they share, or the lowest common multiple, is 12. And therefore, 12 is going to be the lowest common denominator. If I was to add these 2 fractions together, I could add 1/4 plus 5/6, and I could use 12 as the lowest common denominator. The truth is, 24 is a common denominator, but it's not the lowest. So the answer for this question is false. 12 is the lowest, not 24. In question 2, 3/4, this symbol says greater than, so 3/4 is greater than 5/8. So what we want to do then is we want to draw these two and see if we can figure out if they are the same or if they're different. So I'm going to draw 3/4, and I'm going to draw 5/8. And it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like 5/8 is not as big as 3/4, but my drawing might be a little off, so I better double check. How can we double check? Well, what we want to do is we want to create equivalent fractions to both so we can compare them properly. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a common denominator. The lowest common denominator 3/4 and 5/8 share is 8. So an equivalent fraction to 5/8 is, well, itself. And an equivalent fraction to 3/4, if I multiplied 4 by 2 to get 8, I must do the same to the numerator to create the equivalent fraction 6/8. So instead of saying this question, what I could really say, since 6/8 is the same fraction, I could really say 6/8 is greater than 5/8. And if I wrote it that way, I know for sure that is true, because to have 6/8 is more than 5/8. So the answer is true. And the only way I could do it was to use equivalent fractions. Question 3 says 3/5 is equal to 6/8. So 3/5, I gotta write this down here, my board's 3/5 is equal to 6/8. Well, we have to see if that's true or not, because we got to be able to compare them. So we're going to use a common denominator. I don't need the lowest one. I'm just going to use 40, which actually is the lowest one. And I'm going to see if these two are equal. Now I multiplied 5 by 8 to get 40, so I have to multiply the numerator by 8 as well. So 24/40 and 5/8 are the same amount. They're different fractions, but they're equivalent fractions. And if I go over here, I multiplied 8 by 5 to get 40, so I do the same to the numerator. I get 30 out of 40. So when I look at them as equivalent fractions with the same denominator, I clearly say they're not the same. This is actually a larger fraction than 3/5, so the answer therefore is false. Question 4 says 20 is a common denominator for the fractions 1/3 and 2/5. If we look at the multiples of each, if I use 3 and 5, I can clearly see by looking at the multiples that they don't share 20 as a common multiple, and therefore the answer would be false. Another way I could have done it was, I know that in order for 20 to have 3 as a factor or to have 3 as a multiple, it would have to add up, and 2 plus 0 is 2, so it doesn't have 3 as a factor, which means it's not a multiple of 3 as well. Question 5, if I can get it up here. What is the LCD? Now, LCD is not your TV set. It stands for lowest common denominator for 1/5 and 3/8. So when I look at these two, I have to look at my multiples for 5 and 8, and I think we already did it. If I look at the multiples of 5, The first one they actually share is way over here. It's actually 40. So 40 is the lowest common denominator both would share. Not, sorry, 40 is. So the answer is 40 is the lowest common denominator. Question 6 says, what's the third common multiple of 4 and 6? So for this one, we're going to have to write all of our multiples. So 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36. Oh, that's a 6. 40 and 44. I'm going to stop there. I think that's probably enough. We'll see. 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36, 42, and I'll stop there. So let's look at the common ones we have. So one common multiple is 12. Another common multiple is 24. And the third common multiple they both share is 36. So what is the third common multiple both 4 and 6 have? The answer is 36 is the third common multiple. Question 7, it says 1/2 is equal to how many twelfths? Well, if I use my algorithm, I know I multiplied 2 by 6 to get 12. So I have to do the same thing to the numerator, and therefore I have 6 twelfths. And most of you probably know that half and 6 out of 12 would both be 50%. So yeah, 6 out of 12 is 50%. Question 8 is a little bit trickier. 4 times what is 24? Well, we knew we multiplied the numerator by 6 to get that, so I have to do the same thing to my denominator, and my answer would be 30 24ths. 24 30ths. Question 9, I had to multiply 3 by 5, if it works here. My computer's going a little wonky today. So therefore, I had to multiply this number by 5 as well. What number do you multiply 5 to get 10? The answer is 2. And finally, 2/5 is less than how much? So in order for us to compare these, we better change these all to fractions that have the common denominator. So 2/5 is equal to 4/10, because if I multiply by 2 and multiply by 2, we get 4/10. 3/5 is equal to 6/10. So if I look here, 4/10 is less than what, which is less than this? The answer has to be 5/10. There, that wasn't so bad, was it? So that's all your review from 7.1 on finding common denominators of fractions. If you have any questions, make sure you make a note of it and ask me on Monday.